You expecting that? Yeah, same day. Friday also there. Friday what? Friday TSC? Oh, yes. Yeah. Oh yeah,
All right, let's begin. So where we left it off was with this with the shared preferences editor. We want to save the information. So we save the number of games played, and what it wants is to call commit. If you don't call commit, your information does not get written to the memory, to the permanent, the persistent memory. So we have to call commit. But the good thing is that before we call commit, we can put all the other information as well. So we call commit only once and it saves everything. So see here it says pass the keys and values you want to write using methods such as these, then apply or commit to save the changes. So we can call multiple put statements. We can put strings, whatever data we want to save. So what we want to save is the result of the game, who won the game. And we want to save the date and time and the order of moves. So who won the game is an easy one. We can just save where is game finished. We save who won the game, right? And this remains, who won is initialized as a blank string, as an empty string. So what that means is when it's empty, it's a draw. So we can either explicitly write draw there, or we can just save who won the game. So that's what we'll do. We'll just save who won the game. So we'll say put string and then again constants dot game results, comma who won, right? So this will save who won. And then the same thing, put string. Now, okay, I'm jumping ahead. We want to save date and time. How do you deal with date and time objects in other languages? Yes, you use a built-in class to get the time. Right? So let's say if you were using some other language that is familiar to you, JavaScript or Java or whatever, what do you get? Then you know, what are the different ways time can be represented? Timestamp. Have you heard of the word epoch? So one common way, we may not do that, but time starts in the computer world. Time starts on 1st of January of 1970. That is 0. So that is basically 00 AM. midnight of 31st of January 1969, when that day ends, that's when the time starts in the computer. That's how it is saved in most places. So you can, many languages will give you a function called get time, like JavaScript get time in milliseconds or whatever it is called. It tells you how many milliseconds have passed since the time started, which is 1st of January. So that is one way you can get an integer and save it. That makes comparisons, etc., much easier. So if you are working with something, a data set where you need to compare events, what happened before, how much was the lapse between the two, it's very easy to do those operations when you're dealing with integers, right? But to display it, if I tell you, give you a number, whatever, let's say 7 million, you have no idea what it means. So there is a human representation which will say, today's date, for example, 2nd of March, what is the time? 1:50 p.m. So that is the other way. So Kotlin provides us all of those, and what we can do is because we are going to use it for display only, we'll choose whatever is the most suitable. So the way I would go about and this is also, I keep doing this, and one of you also said that this is also sort of a learning how to address these problems, how to go about finding information that you have an idea of, but you don't know exactly how to do it. So how do you do date and time in Kotlin? So I'll just Google date and time in Kotlin. So there's some information here, but what we want is, maybe this will give us the details. Right, so it has these classes called local date time, local date, and local time. So again, there's another complication with time. Time here is right now 1:40, 1:50 p.m. But in California, it's not 1:50. In the UK, it's not 1:50. But in the computer world, if you look at that integer, it's the same time everywhere. A time zone is applied to calculate the human time. So we are in the Eastern time zone of North America. So when we take that time, it is converted to that. But the same time, because we know what the different time zones around the world are, what their differences are, how they are related to the GMT, the Greenwich Mean Time. That is at the meridian, 0 meridian. So basically, that's what it is. So this local date time, when we call this, it is going to tell you the time in your local time zone. So if you change your time zone, that thing will change also. Let's say you are here, it says 1:50 p.m. Now you are traveling, you went to Europe and you changed the time zone in your phone to say, okay, right now I am in, I don't want to see 1:50 p.m. I want to see 6:50 p.m. or whatever the time there is. So your time zone will change. So all those entries will automatically change. And this you can see, like for example, you set an appointment in your calendar. You set it for 10th of March, 10 in the morning, you've got an appointment. You've got an interview. And it so happens that tomorrow you travel, you go to California. Suddenly in your calendar, it won't say 10 a.m. anymore. It will say 7 a.m. Which can be confusing. You will think, oh, my appointment, it's not at 7 but it's 7 in the morning in California. And it's telling you the local time. So those are the ways, things that you may need to deal with when you're coding. For us, it may be sufficient to look at it, so in Kotlin, you have this class, local date time off, and then you can supply year, month, day, time, etc. And then when you say println date time, it prints this. What we want is, when the game is being saved, we want to use this concept called now. What is the time right now? We don't care. We don't know. Right? We don't know what the time is. We want to know what it is. So we will call this method now. So if you do this, well, date time equal to local date time dot now, and you print it, it is going to print the current time. And there are various utility classes on formatting the time. So for example, look at this. So this is the time now, whenever this author did it. And then it gives you the date time formatter class, gives you options whether you want to, how much detail of the time you want to see. Medium, full, short, etc. So full looks like this: Friday, December 9, 2016. You can even specify a pattern, MDY HMSS. So basically it prints the date and the time. So these are various ways you can format the time for display. There are, if you look deeper, you will find other classes which will do things like 5 seconds ago, 10 minutes ago, yesterday, last week. All of that you will find it's inbuilt, or somebody has done a utility class. Because many times you're reading your list of emails. It does not always say the full date. Sometimes it just has the timestamp, 3 p.m. You know it's today's 3 p.m. 5 days from then, it may not say, give you the time, it will just give you the date. Like that. So in our case, what we want is, let's go with this. Let's say we want to print like this. So we want the date and time now, and then we want to format it using this. Okay, so that is what we can save. So when we are displaying in our list, we will show this. So let's get this local date time dot now. So before we put anything here, let's retrieve it. So and as before, current min is 15. Okay. This is another error you will run into from time to time when using Android. See, what does it tell me? Call requires API level 26. Current minimum is 15. Can anyone tell me what that is about? Where do we look for it in our project? So somewhere in our project, we have said that this app will run on Android API 15 and above. But this function call is only available in 26 and above. So what about 15 to 25? This function cannot be used, right? So we have two choices. We find a function that will work in API 15, or we up our, because there may be times something has been introduced in version 26, what we were talking about earlier, the VR, virtual reality headset and all that. Now maybe there are functions, if your app is related to that augmented reality, you're doing something, and that feature got introduced in API 26, then there is no point in supporting 15, 16, 17, because your app uses that, it won't even work. So you just change the API support from 15 to 26 and be done with it. So in our case here, and the where you will do it is in your project. And I don't remember offhand where it sits, probably in the build. So what you will do is, and there it is, see, min SDK version 15. That's what we have said, that our app has minimum SDK version of 15. That's what the error message is telling us, that your minimum API is 15. Let me change this to 26. So now this Gradle is a plugin they use to manage the build process in Android Studio. So anytime we change these files, it needs to resync. And then now let's go back to this. See, that error went away. That error, which was, there was a red underline on this now, which said that you need a minimum. So this is how we'll solve it like this for now. And I'll leave it to you as an exercise because date and time have been around since before 1970. So there are ways. API, the very first API of Android had ways to do this. So you should be able to use API 15. Okay, but we'll do this for now and move on. So what we want to do now is we want to save. Actually, I will go ahead and format it as well. So local datetime.now, and then we want to format it using this pattern. Copy, yeah. So what this does is it will give us a string that is formatted, the current date and time formatted like this, and we'll just save it. Okay. So how do we do it? We use put string date time there it is, it's saved. So I forgot to start the recording at the beginning of the lecture. If you notice that this thing is not here when we start, this shows that the lecture is being recorded. Please remind me. We had a break, so I forgot. That's the first thing I do when I come in, is to start the recording. So somebody is missing. Harry is not here today. Sandeep is not here as well. So please, since I don't have the first half of the lecture recording, if they ask, you're welcome to show them. You're welcome to show them your code so that they can catch up. Okay. The next thing we need to save is the order of moves, right? How do we save it? So in our save key value data, right? Shared preferences dot editor. These are the methods it gives us. So we have put boolean, put float, put integer, put long, put string set. We don't have something called put array. We cannot save the array directly. Otherwise, it would be very easy. We'll just say put array and we'll just pass the array and then we will be able to retrieve it. But since we can't do that, we must somehow convert that array of numbers to a string. That's one option. The other option is that we could just have kept it. We could have kept it as a string all along and just saved that string. Because we are not using it as an array anywhere. See what I mean? So those are the two options. One is to join these elements together and make a string out of it so that we can save it. And the other option, which we did not, maybe let's go back and change our code to that. What we can do, you see what I'm saying? That this here, order of moves played, we are saving as an array. Instead, if we make it an empty string, then all we have to do is just keep concatenating over here. Instead of like this, we just say num and this is going to complain because num is an integer and this is a string. What do we do here? Huh? So that way, now we've got a string that we can just save. And when we retrieve it, at that time we'll need it. We'll need to know what those individual elements are. We can make it into an array and then just execute the moves. These are again things you see will happen when you are working on a project. You will start with something and you will realize, oh, it's probably simpler, easier, better to just use a different data type. And sometimes it will be very easy. In our case, we had to change 2 lines of code to make it a string from an array. Instead of keeping it an array and then creating a string out of it without any other use for it. So we were flexible, we did that, and now we can just save this order of moves played here. Here, right? Oh yeah, that's a good point. So do you think Kotlin allows us to do this for strings? It looks like it does. Concatenation. It's a good point. See, otherwise what would happen is every time we will just have only one move in it. That would be a bug. It will show up as just one move. So we want it to keep on appending. So we just go plus equal to and it will keep on appending. Okay. Now we want to save it. Again, put string. Order of moves. Okay, so there it is. I don't know why it keeps this width here. I have no idea how it. Anyway, it's grayed out, which means it's like a label. Okay, maybe it is telling us that this is because of the width. This is going to be executed on whatever is here. So once we have done all this, all we need to say is commit. No, because see, that is an assignment, right? So we are declaring a new variable. So do you guys understand the question Hamza is asking? He's saying that because, see, everything here, all the statements like this put integer is running on this object because of the width. So what happens to this? Does it have anything to do with this object? So in this case, we are creating a new variable and assigning it a value. So does this also, for example, does this mean that this local date time is being executed on this? Is it expecting an object of that? It is not. And it tells you, this is what now it looks like. Wherever it is with this width, it shows you that, you know, this statement we just added, it's related to the object of the width. Okay, so this will save our game. Let's save all the games. What's happening? We are saying, for example, take this statement. Constants.gameResult. Game result is this string, right? So this is the key. So it is going to save in that key. Regardless of which game it is, first, second, third, fourth, doesn't matter. It will keep on saving it in the same key. So you're not saving anything other than one game all the time. Even though the number of games played is getting incremented, but the data for that game is not being saved. So we need to modify our keys to append the game number. So game result of which game? So our key needs to be more specific. So we need to here say explicitly num games played, and this should complain. Did not. So we'll append the number of games played here to all of these, so that for the first game the key will be game result 1. For the second game the key will be game result 2. Third game, game result 3. Otherwise it's always game result. So we're not creating the keys. Following, guys? So see, what happens is, before we appended the game number to the key, we played one game. We say save the game. It comes here. It checks how many games have been played. It says no games have been played. It says okay. So now number of games played is incremented from 0 to 1. It puts number of games played as 1. Then it says okay, save the result into a key called game result, which is basically the words game result. Imagine this part, the highlighted part is not there right now. So it saves in a key called game result. Similarly, it saves in a key called date, time, order of moves, ignoring the number of games played. And now you play another game. And it is finished and it comes here to save. It will retrieve the first line inside the function, will retrieve the number of games played, and this time it will get a 1 because we saved, incremented. So then it will make it 2. So now 2 games have been played. First thing it does is it saves the number of games played back, saying okay, 2 games have been played. And what does it do next? It says game result, same key. Whatever was previously written, it will overwrite instead of saving a new game. So because the key was just game result, it had nothing to do with which game we are talking about. Game 1, game 2, game 3. It is a string. Constants.gameResults is a string. See, this is constants.gameResult, right? It is this string. But regardless of which game, it is always the same string. First game, second game, third game, right? And we want to save the data for each game separately. That's why we need to append the game number to it. So when we have just played the very first game, we want that key to be game result 1. We don't want it to be game result. Second game, we want it to be game result 2, which is what appending the number of games played does. Got it? So that way, it keeps saving. that information for each game separately. Right? Clear, na, Shahrukh?
But it's because in the daytime that it's saving the time, right? So how is it appending the
So date time for the first game. Let's say you just play the game. You want to save it. If we don't have this part here, it is going to create a key in the database called date time and save the timestamp that is right now. Then tomorrow you play another game, which is game number 2. In your list, after you have finished game number 2, you want to see two games, right? They were played 24 hours apart. But what will this function do without appending the game number? It will override, because the key is just date time. It has got nothing to do with the game.
I understand that. It's just how does the plus notation in it just merges the string, so it will be
Oh.
date time plus number of games played. That string will be added right next to it.
So this it is a concatenation that is happening, implicit. So this is an integer which will get converted to a string.
So
It will automatically. I thought that it is going to throw us an error like it did previously. Like here, right? Here we had to say toString. It seems, and this is a guess, you can verify it, that if you start with a string, then it assumes that it has to convert everything else to a string. Which is what is happening here. We started with a string and then we said plus an integer. So it knows that integer is going to be converted to. But if you start with an integer and then add a string, or then it doesn't know. Are you making a mistake? Are you trying to add 2 integers by mistake? You've got a string there. So this will save our game. Let's run it and see what happens. Commit is synchronous and apply is asynchronous. No, this is good question. So see, this save game is coming from game board, and game board is what is currently shown. So this is the main thread. So how many who can explain what is, in terms of practical in practical terms, what is the difference between it being synchronous and asynchronous? You probably know. Let's see if someone else can explain it. What will happen? So commit, see here we have 2 choices. We can say commit or we can say apply. One of them is asynchronous, the other one is synchronous. So what is the difference? What is it in terms of behavior? What would you see? Let's say this process takes half a minute. What will happen if you were to use one versus the other? It will probably take milliseconds. So here in this case you won't notice the difference. But it's a good question. When to use asynchronous, when not to use.
Excessive and urgent process in that case, maybe to be executed first. It is like asynchronous.
So see, what happens is when you're doing things that will take time and you're doing it on the main thread is the one that updates the UI. So if you do something that is running synchronously, meaning the execution goes there and the main thread waits for it to complete. Let's say you're downloading a file which is 500 megabytes in size, and you're doing it on the main thread and you're doing it synchronously. Your app will stop responding until that thing is done. So the user may think, oh, it crashed. stop responding. They'll go and write a review and say all sorts of things. So those kind of things that can block user input, you want to do asynchronously so that it starts a new thread and it keeps doing it so the user can keep interacting with the app. Like when you have written an email, when you hit send, it does not wait for the email to be sent. It brings you back to whatever you were doing, and in the background it sends the email. If you have attached, tons of pictures, a movie, it will take time for all of that to go from your phone. So that is what the difference is here. We said commit. What commit will do is, Shahrukh pointed out that it's synchronous, meaning it will block user input. So if this process was going to take a long time, it's a bad idea. And in general, when they recommend that you use apply, we can just change this to apply, and then what will happen is that it will create a new thread, say save this information and notify when you are done. And the process can choose to ignore the notification also. They don't really, if it has got no use for it, then it can ignore. But when you're doing something like you're sending an email, like the example I gave, maybe you want to show a little message to the user, email sent, or you've downloaded a file that is very long, you want to notify the user. Say, okay, the file download is complete, would you like to view it now? While they're doing other things. So that is why. So we can change this to apply. So that way it is asynchronous. Okay, so let's run this and just make sure that at least right now we won't see any difference because the app, it is just saving. We are not retrieving the data. What we want to do is just make sure that it is still functioning properly before we get too far ahead and we find out that it's crashing. So keeps working as expected. We're able to play the game. Okay. Now, what now? We have saved the game. How can we show it in the list? The list right now has dummy data, item 1, timestamp for game, whatever we called it, right? So our data for the list is coming from here, list content, right? This is where we figured out that it knows how many elements are there. And what we are doing right now, we are creating dummy data. Create dummy data item and then do an add item. So what does add item do? Add item appends to this array, or it's an array list, table list called items. It adds an item to there. And what is that item? It is the dummy item that we have created. This is our text right now, item position, and it does some make details, timestamp, etc. So now what we want is, we want to change all this to meet whatever specs we are creating for the data. Past game list content. So where is this being invoked? So in our recycler view adapter, we have a list of past games. Is this, hang on, let me just split the view. So we have the class past game, and this is the list. What we want to do is, over here in the class that is feeding the data to the recycler view, to the list, we want here now, instead of 20, we want the actual number of games that have been played. And instead of the dummy data, we want to retrieve the data for each game and put it there. That is our job. How do we do that? We do the reverse of what we did to save the data, right? We incremented the number of games and we saved it. And we save the data for each game, one game at a time. Now what we want to do is we want to do the reverse, but we want to read everything at once. We want to know how many games have been played and what the data for each game is, and create that list, so that this adapter view can update itself and show what exactly happened, right? What is our data? So we need to bring here number of retrieve, count. It's a private variable. We need to change this to from the shared preferences, number of games played. And for each of these we will retrieve. So instead of this create dummy data item, we will just say, maybe instead of dummy item, we'll call it a real item. Position we can provide, and we can retrieve the information. What is this doing here, this keyword object? It does not say class, it says object. What does it do? So in Java, for example, object is a class, which is the root of all objects. Here, object is a keyword. What this is doing is it is creating, actually already instantiating an object with this definition, with all these functions, etc. So you cannot instantiate it. It is instantiating for you and keeping it in memory for you. So you can just directly access it. It is an object of whatever definition you have given here. And objects can also inherit. When you instantiate it like this, you could say that this is the name of the object and it is a subclass. This is an object of an anonymous class. This is an anonymous class, you can say. You did not name the class. You are only naming the object. But you can say that that anonymous class has inherited from another class, a view, or whatever it may be. So this is what this keyword is doing. This is an anonymous class, and it has taken this class definition and created an object and called it this. So what we want to do is, now see here we don't have access to the context, the activity context. So we don't have access to shared preferences here. Without that we cannot retrieve it. Just like to save the game, we needed to pass it. So here, in order to do all of that, we need to pass the activity context so that it can read all the information and populate the data. So how is the execution flow? See the fragment is where it puts the recycler view and the fragment gets inflated. It uses the recycler view adapter, and to it passes this past game list content dot items and listener. So this items is what it is passing, and this is what we need to populate. So the best point to do that interception is in this. See, this fragment will have access to the activity context. We can get the shared preferences here, and before we pass this items, we can create a function called populate items and call that here, so that it will populate the items before passing them. Okay, so the first thing we need is on the game board, you remember the way we did it? We got this dot get preferences. So this is how we get a preferences object. Okay, so now I'm running into a problem that the fragment itself does not have access to the preferences. What I would do in this case is I would seek help, shared preferences from a fragment. So Stack Overflow is your best friend. It's really simple. You'll see that instead of saying this dot get preferences, you just have to say this dot get activity. So the fragment is a part of an activity, right? When it is being shown, it is contained within an activity. So you say this dot get activity, and then you get the activity, and you get the preference. And then you can do all those operations. You can read data using the preferences object. So we'll say this dot okay. Okay, Google is your friend, Stack Overflow is your friend, but what happens is that a lot of these things will not be specific to Kotlin. Because of the change, same thing you will run into if you're doing iOS, and you will see that a lot. How many of you have seen when you're trying to find something, how to do it in Xcode, you see answers that are in Objective-C, then you will see something that says Swift version 2, then Swift version 3, then Swift version 4. They give so many versions of one simple thing. Okay, so maybe all we need is okay, it won't give us access to the activity. Okay, it is simple. change is you just have to say activity. Only safe. Okay. So you see, if I say activity dot, it is complaining. It is saying only safe or non-null asserted calls are allowed in a nullable receiver. So what you have to do is you have to say question mark. So it knows that if this is null, it's going to skip that. We know that in our case, it is not going to be null because this fragment will always be embedded in an activity. So it is safe to do this. Okay, so now we have this, and what we want is in this past game list content items, we want to update this. So here we will create a function, and we won't call it private. We'll just, if we call it private, then we won't be able to call it from the other place. So let's create a function called load past game data, and to this we'll pass shared preferences. Right. So what this will do is it will allow us to change all of this. We don't need, for example, to initialize with dummy items. This number, this can still stay private, but instead of a value which is non-mutable, which is immutable, we need to use a different declaration. And what is that? Var. We need to call it a var, otherwise we won't be able to change it. Okay, and here we'll just say initialize it to 0. And this part, since we are not using it, I'm just going to comment out. You can actually comment out the entire init block, really, or delete it even. Do you know the shortcut to comment all the lines at once? Okay, so now we are doing load past game data. I'm going to bring up the model class where we were saving it. So here the first thing we did was to get the number of games played. We just have to repeat this line to retrieve how many games have been played right now. Right, and that goes into this variable count. Okay. Select elements that you want to import. So you will have to import this, otherwise it will not be able to find constants, which is an inner class in our other class. So this now has set the count. We got that far. Now what we want is, just like it was doing the dummy data here, for I in 1 to count, add item. Right. So we need the same code, but instead of doing a dummy item, we are going to retrieve the actual item. So let's do that. For I in, okay, this is needs a bracket. Syntactically, each language introduces its own peculiarity. So if you are used to doing it in one way, it's a simple matter of adopting. Okay. So this is our, now I don't know what it will do because initially count will be 0. So 1 to 0, it probably should not go inside this loop. Add item, And instead of calling create dummy item, we'll say load game. Which game? I, right? And we define a private function. No, actually, you know what? Why don't we just do it in line here? So what have we saved? When we were saving, we saved these three things for each game. Game result, date, time, and order of moves. All right, sir. So we need to retrieve these three things now. The same three things that we saved will retrieve. So let's call it game result equal to shared prefs dot get string. And what we want is this entire thing. Well, not this whole thing, because here we are passing an argument as to what is being saved. So what we want is just the constant and the game number. So what is the constant? Constant is the same game result plus game number. The game number which we are currently retrieving, which is basically, what is it? Which variable name? What is this doing? So see, here we appended, when we were saving, we appended the number of games played, right? So if it was the second game that just finished, we will append 2. If it was the third, we'll append 2. When we are retrieving all of them one by one. So what do we need to append? If we are retrieving the third game, we will append 3, right? So what our for loop is doing, it is going from 1 to count. If we have saved 5 games, it will go from 1 all the way to 5. So when we are doing game 1, we append 1. When we are doing game 2, we append 2. And what has that information? Which variable? I. So we just append an I here. Okay, it wants a default value. So if it is not saved, it wants a default value. So let's say for some reason there is a problem, we can give a default value as error, so that we know that there was a problem instead of giving something random. Okay. And then we will retrieve the date, time. Almost the same statement, just the constant name will change. Date, time plus I, and again we will just give an error as the. So this is basically in your list. If you see the word error, you know that something did not save right. So you see the advantage of using these mechanisms like constants. If we were working with actual strings, it's very easy to miss on a capitalization. Game results, G can be capital in one place, not in the other. All those things. By using constants, we eliminate all of that. Okay, now there is a third thing, order of moves. Right? So and this one I'm not going to say error, I'm just going to leave it an empty string, because this does not get displayed. This will be used internally by us to recreate a game, But if the other two things are in error, then we will not try to use it. So we'll just leave it as an empty string. Now we've got these three things, right? How do we create the game from it now, the object? Right? We have this. This is our object. Each game has these three things. There is an ID, there is who won, and there is a timestamp. So if we see originally what it was creating a dummy item. What is the dummy item? It instantiates an object of that class past game, and it passes it three things: the position, who won the game, and make details. Make details, what it does is it creates if you open the game in the app, you see that where the timestamp is, it says this timestamp for game, and it appends the position. We don't need this. What we need is 1, 2, 3, and in fact we need to add another variable here, which is, what else are we saving other than the who won and timestamp for each game? Order of moves. So we need to carry that around with us. So we will have order of moves as a string. Okay. So there it is, order of moves. Okay. Now we will create objects of this and append it to the items. Past game equal to past game, and what all does it need? It needs ID, which is a string. We can choose to use an ID, or we could even skip it, but since we have it, let's call it game plus I, the game number, right? Who won the game is game result. Type mismatch, required string. This is very different from Swift. So what is happening here is this game result can actually be, it says it's an optional. Why are the reasons it can be an optional? What are the reasons? What could have gone wrong that it will come out as nil? Even though we have given a default value, it is still saying that, oh, it can be, why won't it just be the default? You're not getting any error? You typed all of them, all the arguments? Okay. Date, time. You're not getting this type mismatch, Shahrukh? What is the difference? Can I take a look? So we do have the error. What is happening is the reason it can be nil is it starts at one level above this. Where we call this is over here, this itself. So it starts there. If that object is an optional, it carries all the way down. So what we want is, we want to, like in Swift, what you call unwrapping, you force unwrap. So that's what we want to do. We want to unwrap this. And that this is the error message, type mismatch, string found. No, this is not our error message. So what it wants is double exclamation. That's all it wants at the end. So if we put double exclamation here, it does the job. These are nuances. In Swift, you would be fine with just one exclamation. So Swift and Kotlin are similar. Are you guys doing actual coding in Swift as well by now? You must be, right? And so you will see these things. Swift, you could have put a question mark there. What it would do is, it would say that, okay, this is optional. Don't crash. Force unwrap, if you put an exclamation, it means if it is now, crash. Stop the app. There is a problem. So this has to be used with care. In our case, we know that, if it crashes, there is a bigger problem. We are not saving the data properly. So this will create the past game. And now what we need to do is, we need to call this add item. So since we have already created the past game, the data for it, we'll call add item and we'll pass this past game. Okay, perfect. So now we have this load past game data function, which loads all the data. All the games we have saved will get loaded. I just looked at my watch. We are 5 minutes to 3. Let's wrap this up. I'm going to just do that part where we call this function and see what happens, and then we'll stop. So where was it? It was in past list fragment. Okay. Now we will call this function past game list content dot load past game data, and we'll pass it this shared prefs object. Double exclamation. So this, what it's doing now is, it's calling that. And why is this still red? What is its problem? No value passed. Order of moves. Okay, I did not pass that. Because this is that old dummy function. I'm just going to comment it out. So the error should go away. Yes, it went away. Now then, let's see what happens. Does it actually show in the list? So if you ran the game before, you probably saved a game. Just I'm going to play a couple of games and then restart the app and see what happens. And the reason we have to restart is that we have not built the mechanism to refresh the table when we go back. Okay. All right. I think, do any of you see anything in your list, or it's coming up empty? It's coming up empty, right? So we'll need to debug it. What would be the steps? How would you debug it? What are the possible problems? One possibility is that the count, when it's being read, it's coming up as 0. So it thinks there are no elements. The other possibility is that when it's building what to display, something is missing, right? So how about this? Yeah, try that. It will print error wherever there is not enough saved data. So what I would like you to do is I would like you to debug this. Find out what is wrong, why it is not displaying what we want it to display. Okay, what you said, Shahrukh, it worked, but it's saying error, error, error. So basically, the count was 0. It's coming up as 0 for whatever reason. So we'll fix that. I do have your papers with me from the exam. I can hand them to you now, or I can do that next class and we'll go over what the exam is. What do you guys prefer? Okay, why don't you guys take it? Okay. I'll make an announcement about your project, what you expected. I don't want you guys to keep you guys here too long. Project is, I don't remember if I think 20 or 30% of your course is okay. You don't have, right? I have yours separately. So the project is a big chunk. So please think of some topics worthy of what you think. You know, it's 30%. If my memory serves me right, you can look it up in the syllabus. I want you guys to think of topics and groups who you are going to pair up with. Groups of 2 or 3, no more than 3. Ideally 2. Try and see if you can work with just one other person. Think of a topic and do a basic design like we did for the tic-tac-toe, those screens. Do something like that, write up the functionality and submit it by the next class. So then I will review it and we'll see if that is acceptable in terms of the scope, or if it's too much, if it's too ambitious, I will tell you that okay, it's good, but try and do a smaller portion. So let's do it that way. So that is going to be one thing, and the other assignment you have today is to debug this, and we will take it from next class. These are important things. I don't want to rush through them. So we'll do that. And one other thing I wanted to ask you was in terms of, we will probably not need the entire class next class. We won't take 3 hours to finish this. We should be done in an hour or so maximum. What would you guys like to do next? What kind of an app? And I have some suggestions and you can tell me what you prefer. So one possibility is we can look at making network calls, API. So like some service on the internet. One possibility is foreign exchange, to create an app that lets you convert amount in one currency to another. That's one possibility. The other is to work with maps, to show locations of certain items on a map. So for example, let's say all the Dollarama stores in Delhi on the actual map of Delhi. That's the second option. And the third option, very interesting too, is to use artificial intelligence, to use an artificial intelligence model to create an app which will do things like, if you've got 4 dogs in front of you, you point your camera, it will tell you what breed it is. Something like that. Something along those lines. So these are the options I'm thinking. So who wants to do API calls? Show of hands. Network calls. One more. What about the second was maps? Who wants to see how to work with? Well, we can do all these three probably, one after the other. Network calls first. Everybody okay with network calls? So we'll do network calls. We'll create an app. It should take us one class, maybe a class and a half, to create an app that you can specify 2 currencies, choose from a list or whatever, and it will let you type an amount and convert it into the other currency. So we'll do that. Okay. Okay, good. So have a good week. See you guys next Monday.
Did you add anything here? No? Oh.
No, I did not add anything. Just to me it is showing error. So basically it could not retrieve anything. It's trying to read.
Yeah, so but for me it's not displaying anything. Close that. Close it all together. Might have some cached version of the previous one. Oh, okay. So what you want to do is, in that case, Sharif, is put some console login statements inside the for loop, see if it is going there or not, or put breakpoints and see the value of count. Or there is no count anymore, it's going from 1 to 3. Yeah, you calling this function load past game data? Oh no. Where are you calling this? So this is in the list fragment, past list fragment, where you get the shared references. Yeah, right after where your cursor is on the next line, call that. I'll show the code here. I just need to figure out the count stuff. Should work. Yeah. It can be in Java or Kotlin, whatever you prefer.